Colleen Miller, who's going to guide us through lessons learned about social media in 2020 and how you can translate that look back into a solid social media plan for 2021. As a reminder, we are using the chat function as well as allowing for some open Q&A after Connie and Jeremy conclude their presentation. So with that, I'm going to hit record and hand the microphone over to Connie and Jeremy to dive into the world of annual funds.
Thank you. So I don't know if any of you guys were with us at the end of, I guess it was October. But if not, welcome for the first time. My name's Connie Fernandez, and I'm the COO at Skye Strategies. And like Amy said, we are a fund development firm, primarily dealing with grant writing, but we have staff have a long history of fund development in general. So we wanted to talk to you about annual fund today, and I'll let Jeremy introduce himself.
Hi everyone, my name is Jeremy Burrows. I am the Director of Production and Training at Skye Strategies. And as Connie said, we primarily work with grant development, fund research, that kind of stuff. We're really excited to talk about annual funds today. So Connie, do you want to get started?
All right, thanks. And we want to thank ArtsBuild for putting these shared services opportunities together. So it's a really good way for us all to come together and try to work as a team. So today we're going to take a really high level look at annual funds, give you guys some food for thought about what you need to consider before taking that step. Or like Amy said, maybe you're already there and you need to take it to the next level. Just kind of what is an annual fund, how you can get started, the steps you need to take to before you jump into it. The different models you should consider, donor data, what to do with it, how to manage it, and gift acknowledgement. So why have an annual fund, and what does that mean to have an annual fund? Basically, it's a reliable revenue base that is used to support programs. So basically, it's your pool of money that you can hopefully use a lot of it for operational expenses, things like that. I know some campaigns will have opportunity for people to designate, because some people just really like to designate, and we can talk about that. But really, the main goal is that it is a reliable revenue source from year to year, where you have an annual goal, and when you put it that line item in your budget, you're fairly certain that you're going to be able to say, okay, I can depend on 20,000 or $1 million or whatever it happens to be in alignment with your budget every year from this source. And really, the fundraising professionals will say that about 71% of an organization's funding really comes from individuals. And when I say annual fund, we're talking about that chunk of money. You may have various different campaigns that all feed into that one goal. Excuse me. But because 71 sounds like a lot, and it is. So it's that relationship building piece. So it could include anything from online giving, special events, capital campaigns, direct mail pieces, planned giving, things like that, all funnel back into the annual fund. But today we're really going to just focus on kind of what we think of as a traditional annual fund, which is the online and the offline pieces. We're not really going to get into capital campaigns and stuff like that. So when you're getting started, you really want to put together a plan. So, and I say this because a lot of times people get really excited about an annual fund, or a board member says they need it, or somebody says they need it. And that can be well and true, but then they just decide, well, we're going to send out a letter, or, we're sort of a knee-jerk reaction to the fact that they feel like they need something and they need to be doing something. But you really need a plan. You need to actually sit down, form a committee. It could be, leadership, staff, program folks, board people, whatever that you think that needs to look like. If you have a group of supporters already, even though you don't have a formal annual plan, maybe you put them on the advisory committee, so you can kind of see what makes them motivated to give. But you really need to evaluate, what are you already doing to bring in annual gift donations, whether it's a formalized approach or not, and start tying it into your overall organizational plan. You may have a strategic plan. You may have a business plan each year for how you're going to get the dollars you need for annual operating, and tie it all in. So this is an example. Let's say you're a performing arts organization and you have 4 performances a year, let's say 1 a quarter. Then you want to look at what you're actually doing to be able to tie back, that new campaign into what you're doing each year. If you are already doing some things to bring in annual donors, look at that. Is it tied in to your mission, vision, values? Is it tied into your program? Is it even working? Or are you just hoping, you're sending out a letter and you're hoping that you're getting, $5,000 back from folks? What are you spending on it? What are you spending on printing? And, maybe you are, you subscribe to some sort of service or something, like really looking at what you are already doing, whether it's working. It could be working really well and you're ready to ramp it up. And then maybe taking a peek at what other similar organizations are doing that seem to be working well for them, and whether you can take that model and revamp it to work for you. And that could be local folks. That could also be organizations in a similar size city with a similar feel. So it doesn't have to all just be Chattanooga organizations. You could look at other cities across the country that have sort of a similar arts climate, or if you're not an arts organization, kind of a similar setting. So once you get all of that data, basically your data collecting, you're going to have to analyze it and say, well, what can we realistically do? We're going to talk about different funding models, but you're going to have to think realistically about which can fit with your organization based on your resources. Basically, how much money do you have to put into launching something new or expanding something existing? And staff. Is your staffing available? Do you have a volunteer base? If you don't have the staff, do you have a volunteer base that maybe you can pull some people in and help you launch the initiative? What does your donor base look like right now? And do you have a way of acquiring new donors? And I say that because when you're looking at your best funding model, it could be that your first line of defense out of the gate is not, or your first goals isn't to raise a ton of cash, but it's more to get more donors in. So maybe everyone's giving a small amount, but you're growing your donor base. And so this is something to consider if you really don't have a robust donor base to start with. And then, one thing I find is a lot of times it will come from the top. It will come from maybe board or leadership. And so I'm not sure exactly if we have executive directors or CEOs here, or if we have development directors listening to this, but we'll find people who, yes, they say, I need to raise XYZ, and I can't hire any staff, I can't hire any consultants, they don't give me a budget. So, I mean, just really think through all of those things about what is feasible when you're analyzing the different models. And then, it's time, once you've looked at all those things, to set your goals. You're going to have your monetary goal. You're going to have implementation goals and a gift acceptance policy. So with your monetary goals, this needs to be very realistic. It needs to be able to tie into actual services, what you're doing. And it can't just be, well, we have a $50,000 gap in our budget, so our goal's $50,000. That's a really poor way to kick off an annual fund. if you don't think you can reach it, there's some organizations that can totally reach that and it's totally doable. They're in a position to get to their gap, but don't let a gap be your goal just because it's a gap. Especially if you're like, oh, well, we have a list of 25 supporters, and you need to think through who those people are, what they can realistically give, who they could possibly pull in and bring alongside of them. And because you want to be able to celebrate success, especially if you're newly launching, or if you're trying to get to the new level. Maybe you've had an annual fund for a couple of years and it brings in about 10 or 15,000, which is great, but you're really ready for it to be bringing in 20. You have to have a plan for that. You have to have people on board, and it has to be realistic. So you want to be able to celebrate that success with all the people who went out on a limb and gave you a stretch gift, or who, decided to ask friends and neighbors and families, to come alongside them. So just be very careful about that goal, because you're going to be promoting that goal and publishing that goal. So you want to be able to celebrate success with it. With the implementation goals, that's really internal. Knowing who's going to do what, when they're going to do it, when you're going to evaluate where you're at. And that's really important, because you're going to use all of this to evaluate your execution of your plan so that you can modify your approach in the future for the next year, and really know what worked, what didn't, and also be able to modify it as you go along. So if you have this great idea for, let's say, a crowdfunding plan, where that's the method you're going to use, and 2 weeks into it, or 1 week, that's way too long. Let's say 2 days into it, no one's biting, no one's pulling. Then you need to have already the plan of when you're going to be assessing that, so that you can very quickly shift gears, figure out what you need to do to correct that course. But you have to have the plan already there, because what will happen is you'll launch it and then no one's doing anything after that. We see that happen all the time. And it's just because people are very busy and wearing a million hats, and this is something new and added onto a lot of people's plates. So that's the implementation goals. And then the gift acceptance policy is it's not really a goal, but I stuck it here because it was really the best place that I knew to bring it up. If you don't have one, you don't technically have to have one, but it's a really good idea to have one. And if you're launching a campaign for the first time, you might as well go ahead and do best practices and get it in place. And what this is it lays out an actual policy of what types of gifts you'll accept, what you won't accept. And I'll give you an example of when that's important. So let's say, I'm just going back to the 4 productions a year, let's say they're stage productions or something like that. And you have a lot of well-meaning people who want to donate in-kind donations of things they think you can use as props, like old chairs and lamps and fun things like that. That may be really helpful in certain circumstances, but it also could create a big burden for the organization. And what you don't want to do is make people mad and have them think you don't want grandma's old chair or whatever it happens to be. So if you have a policy in place about what you will accept, what you won't accept, and you can even put conditions on that, like we have a window of opportunity, I don't know, 2 months before production when we're seeking donations for things, and then that's it, whatever it looks like for your needs. But that really helps you have a clear cut, we take this, we don't take that. And that can even go for things, don't donate your car to me that I need to then go sell and then have revenue off of it. If that's something you don't want to fool with, then put it in the plan. And then how they're going to be recognized and tracked. This is critical, because especially as you're starting to grow and build your donor base, if this falls through the cracks, the likelihood of future success goes way down. So not just how you're going to do it, the time frame. So once a donation comes in, what happens with that? Who tracks it? How does it go into the system? What's the follow-up for acknowledging that gift? And who is responsible for doing that? And what's the time frame? Do you acknowledge it within 3 days? What does that look like? That all needs to be spelled out before you even start trying to have a bunch of donations coming in, because then they're, what are you going to do with them? And that can, once again, especially if it's something new that isn't on anyone's plate right now, it can tend to fall through the cracks. And then you launch it, get some excitement behind it, promote it. Depending on which method you decide to go with will dictate a large part on how you promote it and how it gets launched. But, I would say at the very least, you're always going to have an opportunity on your website. So that's really the planning phase. So here are the ones we're going to just briefly go through today. Like I said, there are major donors, and then there's, like, I guess you would call them regular donors. We're really not capturing the major donors in this, because it really is a different approach. So this is more of the people who are going to give modestly, let's say, maybe even up to $5,000, depending on the organization and under. And this doesn't cover special events, even though those proceeds will go into the annual giving pool, as well as any sort of planned giving or requests or anything that you do like that. So the two groups are online or offline. And all of them provide the opportunity for you guys to showcase your mission, which is what you need to do, because for people who know you, they're going to want to know more. They're going to want to know exactly what their gift can do to forward the mission. For those of you for those who have heard about you but aren't really invested yet, they need to know about the mission. And then there's going to be some people who don't know who you are at all, and this is your prime opportunity, and your first impression, if you will, for some people who are just getting acquainted with you. So consider that when you're choosing any of these, especially when you start getting into things that are online and easily shared through social media. Don't assume, when you're drafting the content and thinking about the appeal, you don't want to assume that everyone knows who you are, because you want this to be shared widely. And one way is to be very clear about what the funds go to, and not being ambiguous about that. So people have a very clear message, especially in this day and age of wanting to make sure, everybody has always wanted to make sure their donations go to exactly what they're supposed to go to. And we have a lot of great organizations doing great work. And unfortunately, sometimes when someone is a little unscrupulous with their donations, that's what the media likes to run with. So you want to make sure that people know exactly what they're giving to and have a really good comfort level with that. And then also with all of these, you can consider giving levels and whether possible perks for certain levels works with your organization. It works for some, it doesn't work for others. But I know that can be appealing to a lot of people. Also, your stewardship and correspondence and your thinking can kind of correlate with that if it needs to, if that makes sense for you guys. I know that having affinity groups for younger donors who can't give as much, but who you want to cultivate and make feel as important as the larger donors can be a good way. So segmenting the different groups and letting people know what that impacted that level, so you can, drill it down to that level of specificity if it works for your organization. That doesn't work for everyone, but it tends. So, when I'm thinking about, the possible perks and things like that, let's say you have an annual, gala, and let's also say, so that's a special event. And then let's say you also, going back to the 4 performances a year. So maybe at a certain level, people get 2 tickets to that gala, and they also get 2 tickets to each performance, or a couple of performances, whatever that looks like. Maybe it's a VIP seat. Maybe you have a VIP reception at the performances. I don't know. It would have to be very specific to your organization, but those are just some of the ideas and things that I see typically when you're talking about levels. Some have for very high, like maybe that highest tier, Some people have, I think now we're talking sort of pre-COVID-ish when people are actually gathering in person. So you might have to get creative maybe for this upcoming 3 to 6 months, hopefully not longer than that. But those are some of the ideas. Or if you have an organization that has, you know, t-shirts, or if you have a walk, I mean, I'm just trying to think, it can be whatever specific to your organization, but that would be meaningful and enticing to the donor. And then of course, whenever you do your annual report, you make sure that you are recognizing these donors in their proper categories unless they want to be anonymous. So we're going to kind of go through website, crowdfunding, peer-to-peer, email marketing, reoccurring giving, and then the direct mail and the text to give, which those are the offline. So your website really is kind of like your first line of defense. Donors should be able to give there any time they just think of you, whether you're having an active campaign and you're actively soliciting donations or not. And it's just kind of like your permanent home. So if anyone, like, let's say you ran a crowdfunding campaign and someone kept seeing it pop up on, you know, Facebook or whatever, and they kept meaning to give, but now it's closed. They should be able to say, well, I'm going to go to their website and give, you know, blah, blah, blah. So you need to have that already in place. So I would encourage you, if you don't have a mechanism for giving on your website right now, worry about that first. I mean, like, take care of that first before you kind of get in the weeds with the rest of the annual fund kind of planning process, because that needs to be in place and be working very, very well. And it's got to be user friendly. So a couple of mistakes that we see, or maybe not mistakes, but things that can be hiccups, are that there's no one that's really updating the website on a regular basis. And so the information can get really stale. And so you run a campaign and then people go back to the website and the message doesn't correlate. So make sure that if you're running a campaign, like whether it's annual, like a direct mail piece, or whether it's some sort of online giving campaign, that it ties back in, the information's the same on the website. Make sure it's easy to find. So let's say you have a donate now button or something like that. Keep it above the fold, which means that you don't have to scroll to see it. So when you land on the page, whether that's, you know, through your mobile device or your PC, when you land on the page, you see the donate now button. You don't have to go to the bottom of the page. You don't need to go to another page. It's got to be wherever that landing page is that you've given links for. And then also make it mobile responsive. So about 60% of donors arrive at the websites using their mobile device. So if that looks bad or it's hard to navigate, people tend to give up. And when I say hard to navigate, there's all kinds of options for the online donating. You can link it to so many different things. So pick something that's very user friendly. If someone has to fill out some big giant form, that's very off-putting. And a lot of people, if they're in a pinch and, you know, a time crunch, or they're trying to do it on their device and this form is tiny, people don't go too far if it's too convoluted. So just consider some of those things. So crowdfunding, I'm sure you've seen it 1 million times. It is potentially a great source of revenue. The market is very saturated with it right now. But it's a great way to get to really capture folks who can only give small amounts or smaller amounts, depending, and who kind of get pulled in. I won't say impulsively, but they see that their friends are doing it, you know, that kind of thing. You gotta actually plan these things. So once again, we've seen some clients get in a pickle where it sounds like a really great idea and they launch it, but then there's no plan for when are you going to update it? How are you going to keep people engaged? Who's going to do what? Those kinds of things. So definitely plan it on the front end. And I mean, use it as a chance to tell your story. because like I said, it's really easy to overlook these. Sometimes everybody does them for their birthdays now, and so you got to really make it stand out. Um, Also, if you have a very large social media presence, this could be a good avenue. If you're pretty much non-existent on social media, it will be a challenge unless you happen to have some sort of volunteer base who they themselves are very active. Um, there's fees associated with it. So when you get into really researching whether this is an opportunity for you, that you should strongly consider, look at the different avenues, compare the fees, and make sure you don't just assume that you get all the dollars basically. And I would make sure that whatever, if you decide to go this route, that it's for something exciting and specific instead of just an overall raise money for the organization. That can work sometimes, but like, let's say you have a specific need or a specific set of programming or a specific, event or something like that. By event, I mean like a performance or an exhibit, or maybe you're going into schools and doing work with kids, whatever it happens to be. I think it needs to be something that is very specific so people know what they're giving to. And to piggyback off of this is the peer-to-peer fundraising. Very similar to crowdfunding, is actually a subcategory of it, but this is where you have that volunteer base, or people that are considered social influencers, where you have your main campaign, but they actually have their own page. So this is where people say, once again, like, for my birthday, I'm blah, 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 blah. It builds upon relationships. It's a really good opportunity for your organization and your mission to be introduced to people who may not have been aware of you before. And that way your volunteer base is reaching out to their peers, their friends, their coworkers, their family members. And so, if you have a really good core group of people who are excited about doing this and, want to do it, then that's great. But you need to train them. And by that, I mean, we've actually worked with a client, and they actually had a group, they had a base, and we came together with meetings and things like that. And then people didn't do much. They set up their page, but then after they did their first thing, they didn't keep up with it. Once again, it's the planning piece. There was no set calendar and checks and balances to make sure people were updating anything or reaching back out to folks. And it honestly was not a very good campaign. There was a lot of excitement on the front end, but not a lot of follow-up throughout the campaign. So you really need to train the folks. That can be a little time consuming, but you also want to make sure that people are maintaining proper branding and that your message and mission is communicated accurately, because what you don't want to do is have 10 people out there promoting your organization all a little differently, with a little different twist, with a little different, mission and this and that. So you really do need to train them, make sure everyone's on the same page with what they're saying and doing, and have that plan set out. Email. Once again, it's a very saturated market, but it does still work. It's cost effective. There's lots of different, avenues where you can sign up and they'll manage your email list for you. And it's really, a lot of times the pricing is based on how large your email list is, because they're assuming the larger the email list, the larger your return on investment will be. But the tools are very easy for people to use, and it has a very professional appearance when it goes out to folks. One of the biggest indicators of success is whether you can hook people with your subject title to get them to actually open it. So that's one of the biggest challenges. So, there's going to be some people who love you so much they can't wait to get communication from you. They're going to open everything. And then there's going to be those who, automatically put filters on their emails. And so anything like that's going to go to a promotions box, and they may get to it. And when they open their promotions box, there's 300 emails in there. And so there are challenges associated with it, but it does still produce results. And so I think one of the things you need to look at is, what does your donor base look like, as far as age is one thing, age brackets, because some of these are going to work better with different age brackets. I mean, so if you have maybe a millennials or Gen Zs, email marketing is probably not the best. If that's the bulk of your database, your donor base, maybe you ask them if they want to sign up for an email e-newsletter that gives them information, but maybe that's not what you use for the actual solicitation piece. And if you guys have a relatively, well, a manageable, I won't say small, but if you have a manageable donor base, I mean, you could always do a survey for folks that, and find out what appeals to them, and if they don't answer the email, it's probably not email. So if they don't participate in the survey, that's a good way to find out. But email is definitely one to consider. And the reoccurring giving, and that has been really, really popular in 2020. You had a lot of organizations who, goodness, not only did they have to maybe pay staff, even though they couldn't keep things open that were revenue generating, causing, well, financial hardships, but they had donors that were experiencing financial hardships. They had investments that were having the returns, and foundations they depended on that had lower returns on their own investments, and so they're giving out less, things like that. So they quickly shifted to say, hey, I know you normally give, a $5,000 annual gift, but to make it easier, we're going to break that over monthly payments. And then that way they're still getting their gift and the people are still engaged in donating, but it might just be a little bit easier on them than setting that out. So it's reliable. It's great for budgeting purposes. I know that for nonprofits, the ebb and flow of months, and sometimes certain seasons are better than other seasons as far as cash flow. And people have auto drafts, and so they honestly, a lot of people, if it's not too big of a donation, they forget about it. So it's that I give $50 a month, I give $100 a month, it just comes out and they don't see it and they don't think about it. And so it's less likely that they stop doing it. So that's something to consider, that regardless of what method you use, giving this as an option for folks to be able to sign up. So direct mail is one of the offline options, which I think a lot of us think about direct mail when we say annual fund. Once again, this does work. It can work really well for some organizations, but it doesn't make sense for everybody. With direct mail, you can have a lot of fun with it. It can look really nice. You can, share lots of stories, but it can be expensive to do a quality piece. Do letters work? Sometimes letters work. It depends on your population. Do you need a slick, marketing piece? Maybe, maybe not. That's when in that planning phase, you've got to really think through those things. Also, what's the age range of your donors? If you have most of your donors in an older age bracket, direct mail may be something you want to invest in. If it's not, direct mail may not be the way you want to go because of just the cost and the likelihood that it goes in the trash. When you're competing with a bunch of, I'm just thinking about how many solicitations just in this year getting through the mail, you've got to stand out so that you don't get chucked. But for nonprofits, operating locally, where people know your name and they expect and they look forward to that piece. Some people do it with their annual report, and then they use that as a solicitation piece, and maybe they only give it to their top tier donors. Maybe the expense of that and the work of that only goes to folks who are giving $1,000 or something like that. So that's part of your planning phase. So it may not be the only thing you do, but it might be a piece that you do, and it might be just a piece for certain people. It's so individualized. based, and get your board together or get your committee together and talk through what's important and what appeals to different people. I mean, that can be a good indication as well. And then you have the text to give. So with this, one of the biggest negatives is you don't capture your donor data, whereas with the other ones, you're going to have people's names and not phone numbers, emails and addresses and things like that, where you can follow up with them. And text to give is often not like that, but it can be very useful in certain circumstances. And so 2 examples are some clients of ours, and they both used them actually at their fundraising events, and actually had a goal right there. And so people are sitting around at their tables, and these were in-person events. And you kind of get the competitive spirit going, and it's sort of one person had an actual person come up to the front and give a challenge. She said, I can't remember, I think it was like up to $25,000 or something like that. She would match it, her company would match it. And so it really gave encouragement for people to give right then, because it was only going to be within the next 30 minutes or whatever it happens to be. Both of those were hugely successful, and people, I mean, it was so easy to do. So when you're thinking about this one, think about what organic opportunities you would have to use this method in a way that makes sense. You're not going to do a huge prolonged text to give campaign probably. So those are just two examples that we've seen work very, very well. So you have all this data from individuals. What are you going to do with it to continue your annual fund efforts and to grow your annual fund efforts? There's many different management systems. They all sort of specialize in 1 or 2 different things. And it really depends on your needs. The bullet points really just go through the different things that systems can do. Obviously, donation tracking, donor management. Some do add on event management as well. Got the mobile, the online, pledge management, reoccurring giving, all of that in a one-stop shop. If you need all that. If you don't need all that, don't get all that. And that's really when you need to think, okay, so what are our needs? What are we going to use it for? And maybe think about 2 to 3 years out, if you're in the growth phase, like what do we need it to do maybe eventually? And some systems will have like a base package, and then you can add other features on for additional costs. So that may be something you want to do. We'll start here, and then we can always grow it if we need to. Really think about your staff and or volunteers, like who's going to be using it, what is their level of comfort with technology, is it user friendly, things like that. So we see people pay out quite a bit of money for wonderful systems that do a whole lot of things, and then people don't really use them. It never really gets implemented the way it should, just because there's too many features, and so just all of those things are considerations. Definitely think if you're going to really have a meaningful annual fund, you need some sort of management system. Anyone worth their salt is going to let you set up a virtual tour with, basically a salesperson, but they're going to be able to walk you through the functionality. If someone's not willing to do that, you probably don't want that system, because their customer service may not be what you want down the road. And then a lot of them will offer like a 30-day free trial. Push for as long a free trial as you can, to get in there and actually use it and have your staff in there and get some staff feedback and see how you could, a lot of times they'll dump like dummy data in there just so you can see how it works. But I strongly encourage you to consider, like, how are you going to manage this data? You need to know so-and-so calls on so-and-so, and that they gave, $5,000 back in October. Or if that you see that they bought tickets for an event, you want to know like how many of these people at this special table have given. It just helps with all kinds of things, not just actually the ask for the annual fund. And then the last piece is the gift acknowledgement. So it's an opportunity to just have another touch point and let them know how much you appreciate it. But also, so it's that relationship piece, but it's so they can use it for their tax write-offs if that's what, if they decide to itemize and it's over $250. So, well, if it's over $250, you have to have that piece of paper. So you want to make sure you include the organization's name. If you can personalize it, that's better. If you can have a little handwritten note, especially like anything that was peer-to-peer, and sometimes peer-to-peer isn't just online. Some people have little luncheons and they invite people and then they make an ask. If it's something like that, the person who brought them along, if they have the opportunity to write a little hand note on the bottom, that goes over really well. But also make it about them. What did you achieve, or what was achieved because of their donation? And put the focus less on what the organization does, but what the individual allowed you to do, if those semantics make any sense. And then also sometimes you receive, like in the case of a gala, let's say that someone pays $250 for a ticket, but they didn't receive $250 worth of services, but it was over 75. You've got to figure out like how much is a tax write-off, how much isn't, and you have to actually state that in your letter. You can visit the wonderful IRS website for all the stipulations on that. But just make sure you thank them appropriately, thank them what's in alignment with how they can use it for their taxes, and just use it as another touch point. And so I know that we went through that very quickly. I tried to move it along as much as I could, and I'm open for questions. And on the screen, you'll see our contact information. Yeah. So I am looking at the chat. Okay, how to promote the new campaign and examples of perks. We kind of hit some examples of perks already. And examples of how to promote. I mean, I'll give you some examples, but it is very individualized. Let's say you're an organization that does a podcast, a weekly podcast or something. I mean, there's an opportunity to announce it. If you, some people are already doing e-newsletters, and maybe that's not how you're going to make the ask, but you're going to, actually, not launch, but what am I trying to say? Let people know that you're about to do this, build some hype around it, give them, maybe it's a save the date of when you're going to launch it, letting people know how you're going to launch it. If it's going to be, especially if you're going to go take the plunge, you're going to do a really cool direct mail piece, let people know it's coming their way. Hey, check, make sure, just address the elephant in the room. Hey, don't throw my stuff away. Not like that, but, just like heads up, look for it. It's coming your way. We're really excited about this. We'd love your feedback, try to engage them in a certain way. But it could be, keep your eyes open on Facebook. We're going to be doing a crowdfunding. We're really excited. We started this new program at Orchard Knob Elementary, free music lessons. I don't know what it looks like, but just to really think about what are your avenues. If you're doing performances and you have, billets or whatever, I mean, there's all kinds of ways you can promote it. Also, I mean, sometimes this is exciting. Sometimes it's hard to get, but especially if you're launching something, or if you're trying to, like I said, bump it up to that next level, if you already have something in place, if you have somebody that is willing to put up a challenge, like a match or something like that, that can build some excitement. You can create a theme around it if you want to. If you're going to launch it, let's say your organization, makes sense to align with Black History Month or whatever that looks like. I mean, maybe it's thematic. So, I mean, get creative with it, but that's part of that planning process to think about how can we launch this? How can we promote it? Where does it tie in? Where does it make sense? Should we do it a month before our big event, because then we can also cross promote our event in this, like what does that look like? I don't know. Hopefully that helps. I mean, it's so individualized per organization and also kind of what space you're working in, but you can get some really creative, creative ways.
I have a question. I know a lot of times, like I'll have a family member, and the only time I hear from them is when they need some money, right? So how does an organization stay in touch and build relationships with the donors? The other 364 days of
Sure.
the year.
Sure. So I hate to say planning again, but that's also that donor cultivation piece. So yeah, you thank them with the letter within a week or 3 days or whatever your process is. What next? Because that isn't something, I think you give them opportunity. So once you have that information, then maybe you invite them. If you do, and I will say this, only if you do it well and you keep up with it. If you do an e-newsletter sporadically and it's random, don't invite anybody to join up for it. But if you do a good job and it's consistent and the information, you're really working it, invite them. Maybe the next step, maybe a touch a month, maybe. For some people, it may not be that much. For some people, like I said, if you have set things that you're doing in the community throughout the year, maybe it correlates with those things. So we're about to have our spring concert in the park. We're going to reach out to all these donors. Hey, thanks again. Come see what you helped us do. You know what I mean? Like, so you tie it back into the programming. The kids with the free music lessons are now going to do the recital, even if it's online. Invite them to see. You keep them engaged, and they're like, man, this is really cool. I'm so glad I gave to it. I would say anything like that. Also, if it's true, not if it's just, invite their opinion if it makes sense. But I know some people like that as well. Let's say, hey, we're doing strategic planning and we're about to try to pick out of these 3 things what's most important to the community for blah blah blah. Maybe send them a survey and get the donor's opinion. Like I said, only if it's authentic and genuine and you're going to use that information. Don't do it just to be a touch point. But I mean, people like that. They like to be heard. So I think there's all kinds of ways that, like, say, make it a goal. Some people, you're only going to touch them once a quarter. Some people you can do once a month. I mean, some of that's staffing too, like manpower. What do you have the capacity to do?
Okay.
Anybody else?
Yeah, actually, I'm doing a campaign right now. It's sort of art related, but I'm trying to start like a tiny home village. Not really knowing many people, but I'm trying to promote it online. And so this has been a little bit helpful, but I'm just trying to see about how to create an audience, maybe with social media as well, to build that sort of fund for the future.
So if you can identify a handful of key supporters, even if they're supporting at a lower monetary level. I mean, I think it's important for anybody that's going out there helping you fundraise that they've given something. I don't care if it's $15, but some skin in the game so they can say, I'm donating to this organization. I'd like for you to. But if you can find some folks who are really passionate and can be your core group to start it, and maybe if you can, it'd be great if some of them are more social influencers where they have a lot of following. So you said you wanted to build it on social media. If these people are people who can bring people into it and are willing to do that for you. And then maybe if there's the ability for someone with financial capacity to give a larger gift. So let's say you're starting this out, come up with a modest goal, but if you can kick it off and be close to halfway through with your goal, that looks really great. And it gets other people like to give to a winner. I know that sounds bad, but a winning team, it's harder for people to come on board at the very beginning, especially with something new. So if you can kind of get to more of that midpoint before you publicly launch it and really push it out, you'll probably get more traction. And people love to close gaps, you know, so the closer you actually get to your goal, the more you can kind of push it out. And psychologically, people like to come in and save the day. But I think you got to start with that core group of people who are willing to do that work. And that goes back to, will they also give the time for you to sit down and do some training with them of what you want that to look like, exactly what they're expected to do, when they're expected to do it. So it's more than just, hey, I'm going to invite some people to like this page or whatever it happens to be. So kind of think through what you need to happen and who can help you at least launch that. I don't know. I hope that helps.
We have any other questions? Well, thank you, Harlan. Appreciate you chiming in there, and James, you as well. So we will have this recording posted to our YouTube page. If you know of anyone who reached out and wanted you to take really good notes, we do have a recording of it. So I'd like to thank Connie and Jeremy for being here with us today and putting together such an intensive presentation. We really, really appreciate that, and really appreciate the service that you bring to our community arts partners. As a reminder, we'll be visiting with Connie and Jeremy again next month, which will be the new year. So that's exciting. I know everybody's ready for a new year at this point. So if we don't have any other questions, thank you all for joining us, and feel free to reach out to us at ArtsBuild, and you've got Connie and Jeremy's contact information there on the screen, and we're here for you and happy to help. So thank you all for being here.
Thanks.
All right, thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Happy holidays, guys.
You too.